Welcome. If you enjoy scary stories, stay with us. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep releasing new tales. Take a deep breath, hold it. The story is already reaching for you through the screen. Let's begin. Story 1. The first time I saw Andrew after he died, I was arranging flowers in the parlor. Late October light filtered weakly through the windows, and the marigolds I had brought in from the garden were already drooping, their orange petals folding inward like stiff, aging hands. The grandfather clock in the hallway had just finished striking 3, and I recall thinking the chimes sounded unusually long as if each note dissolved slowly into the next until they blended into one unbroken hum. I didn't turn when I sensed him. I recognized the change in the air immediately. It thickened, closing in like the heavy stillness right before a storm breaks. Andrew had always carried storms with him. Even when he walked the earth, "Martha," he said, his voice exactly as I remembered it, rich and smooth like well-aged bourbon. "My dear Martha." The marigolds quivered in my grasp. A bright petal slipped from my fingers onto the polished mahogany table, vivid as a drop of blood. "You're dead," I whispered to the flowers. "I buried you 3 weeks ago." His laugh was soft, almost tender. "Death isn't quite what we imagined, my love." I forced myself to turn, and there he was standing in the doorway between the parlor and the hall. He looked exactly as he had the day before his heart gave out, tall, composed, dressed in his charcoal suit, the silver at his temples giving him that dignified air he always liked to cultivate. Only his eyes had changed. Where they had once been warm brown, they now carried the dull, lifeless sheen of river stones. "Why are you here?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. Andrew had been possessive in life of my time. My thoughts, my very breath. Death, it seemed, had only sharpened that instinct. "To bring you home," he said, stepping forward. "We belong together, Martha. We always have." I backed away until the table pressed hard against my spine. "I am home." He shook his head slowly, mournfully. "No, home is with me now in the dark, where I've been waiting." That was only the first visit, not the last. He returned the next day, and the day after, always at exactly 3 o'clock, always with that same awful gentleness in his voice. Sometimes he only watched me, silent and unblinking, as I moved through the house with trembling hands. Other times he spoke, describing the place he wanted to take me, a realm of endless night and whispered promises where we would never be apart. Again, I tried everything to stop him. Salt along the thresholds, crosses, over the doors. Sage burned until the whole house reeked of it. None of it made any difference. He simply smiled, the same indulgent smile he used to wear whenever I tried to reclaim a bit of independence during our marriage. "You can't keep me out," he would murmur. "I'm your husband. Where else would I be but at your side?" The worst part was how familiar it all felt. Even as a ghost, Andrew followed the same patterns, watchfulness disguised as devotion, threats woven into affectionate phrases, the gradual wearing down of my will. But now there was something darker beneath it all, a growing sense that his patience had limits, and that sooner or later he would stop asking and simply take me. I began sleeping during the day in hopes of avoiding him, but he found ways to wake me. The grandfather clock chimed at impossible hours. Footsteps echoed in the hall, drawing closer and closer until I had no choice but to open my eyes. My dreams were filled with rot and shadow. Andrew standing at the foot of our marriage bed, arms spread wide, waiting. The neighbors noticed my decline. Of course, Mrs. Peterson arrived with casseroles and pitying looks, whispering about grief and healthy coping. The Reverend visited too, offering prayers that felt thin and weightless in my haunted rooms. None of them understood. Grief wasn't the problem. Andrew's refusal to accept his own death was. As October slipped into November, my strength waned. The line between the living and the dead grew thinner with each passing day. I began to glimpse the world. Andrew described shadows drifting against the flow of light, murmurs riding the edges of sound, all promising rest if I would only surrender. Then, on a bitterly cold morning, clarity came. I stood in the kitchen, watching frost spread across the windows. The icy lines were forming shapes to intertwined rings. That's when I understood. Andrew drew his power from this house, from the life we had shared within its walls. If I wanted freedom, I would have to abandon everything. I packed one small suitcase that afternoon, working in frantic bursts between the clock's chimes. Clothes, money, my grandmother's jewelry, the bare necessities. As I moved through the house, I felt Andrew's presence swelling, his anger sparking in the air like static. When the clock struck 3, he appeared not in the doorway, but directly in front of me. His form was more solid than ever. "You're planning to leave," he said. The temperature plunged. "After everything, after all my patience, you would still run?" "Yes," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I'm leaving." "Andrew, you're dead. I'm alive. And that's how it's meant to stay." His face twisted into something monstrous. "You were always stubborn, Martha." "It's what I loved, and what I needed to correct." His hands darkened into shadow as he reached for me. "If you won't come willingly." He never finished the sentence, because at that moment I did something I had never dared in our entire marriage. I fought back. The silver letter opener I had tucked into my pocket flashed as I swung. The blade passed through him like smoke, but the intention behind it struck true. He recoiled, his shadowed form rippling before knitting itself together again. "You can't hurt me," he snarled, though for the first time. Doubt crept into his voice. "You're already dead," I said. "But I can refuse you. I can choose life over whatever half-existence you're offering. I can say no, Andrew. I should have said it long ago." Each word made him thinner, less defined, as though my defiance unraveled him. He reached again, but his hands swept through me like cold wind. "Martha, please," he whispered, and for the first time I heard fear. "I love you. Goodbye, Andrew." I walked through him, feeling only a fading chill. That day, I left the house and never looked back. It still stands empty, a monument to a marriage that had always been a cage even before death joined the conversation. I found a small apartment in another town where sunlight spills through bare windows and no clock tolls ominous hours. Sometimes, around 3 in the afternoon, I feel something, a faint echo of Andrew's old grasp, a trace of possessive affection reaching across the divide. But it's weaker now, more memory than presence. And if I dream of darkness and outstretched hands, well, they're only dreams, not commands. I've learned that hauntings come in many forms. Some have nothing to do with ghosts. Some are woven into the relationships we build, the vows we make, the pieces of ourselves we surrender. Andrew taught me that in life. His ghost only emphasized the lesson, but I also learned something else. We can walk away from our hauntings. We can step into the light and leave the darkness behind, even when that darkness wears the face of someone we once loved, even when it whispers promises of forever. Because forever, I've discovered, is far too long to spend in any kind of prison, whether built from walls, vows, or death itself. Story 2. Libraries have always been a place of comfort for me. The dusty scent of old paper, the quiet murmurs drifting between towering shelves, the faint, familiar crackle of pages being turned, all of it brings me back to a time when life felt simpler, before everything shifted. Before I uncovered the diary. It happened on a Tuesday in late October, the kind of autumn afternoon when brittle leaves scrape across deserted sidewalks like timid creatures, and the heavy, grey sky sinks low, pressing against the world like a lid sealed tight. I was deep in the university library's special collections section, gathering research for my dissertation on predictive narratives in Victorian literature. The irony is not lost on me now. At first glance, the diary looked completely ordinary, wrapped in worn brown leather, its pages yellow-edged and dry. No author's name, no date, nothing indicating its origin. Just a plain little book misplaced among academic texts. I would have ignored it completely if it hadn't slipped from the shelf when I reached for another volume, falling open at my feet. The entry staring up at me was marked March 15th, 2024. That alone snagged my interest. Clearly, I assumed it must be a modern imitation, or maybe some avant-garde art project disguised as an ancient document. But the moment I began reading, icy dread flooded my veins. The entry described, with chilling accuracy, the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and everything that followed. Every detail aligned perfectly: the timing, the chaos, the government's response. Yet the diary preceded the events by years. The next pages documented other events I recognized: the COVID-19 pandemic, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the emergence of increasingly advanced AI systems, all written in the same precise handwriting, all using ink that had clearly aged naturally, impossible to forge after the fact. My hands shaking, I skimmed forward. November 2024, December, January 2025. There were more predictions, laid out with the same calm thoroughness. A catastrophic earthquake in Japan, a major leap in quantum computing, a brutally destructive hurricane season. And then I saw my own name, Professor Diana Thorne. It read, "She will make an important discovery in the special collections of Riverside University Library." My heart froze. That was my name, my university. That exact moment, the entry went on. Her discovery of this volume will initiate a sequence of events leading to her involvement in Redacted. Despite her efforts to stop it, she will redact it on February 12, 2025, resulting in the deaths of 17 people. I snapped the book shut, gasping for breath. This couldn't be real. It was impossible. Surely a prank. But who would know I'd be standing in that precise aisle at that exact time? I checked the collection records. The diary had been part of the archive for over 50 years. Donated anonymously in 1973. The leather, the paper, the ink, everything dated properly to the late 1800s. I secretly had the materials tested, calling in favors from the conservation lab. The results were unmistakable, not a contemporary forgery. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've watched in growing terror as each prediction has unfolded exactly as written. The Japanese earthquake struck right on schedule. The quantum computing breakthrough was announced just yesterday. Every detail mirroring the description in the diary. I've tried searching for similar anomalies, some precedent or pattern that could help me understand. Security footage showed no tampering. No one had touched the diary in decades. It had simply existed, waiting for me. I've thought about destroying it, but something always stops me. Maybe it's the scholar in me, unable to destroy a historical artifact. Or maybe it's the entry I discovered last night, dated to days from now. Professor Thorne's attempt to burn the diary will fail, resulting in a fire that consumes the entire special collections wing. The diary will remain intact. The redacted portions haunt me. I've tried everything I know to uncover the obscured text: UV lights, angled illumination, chemical reagents. Nothing reveals what's hidden. The ink covering those sections appears just as old as the rest, as if the author themselves deliberately concealed the most crucial details. I barely sleep now. How could I? Knowing what's ahead, or rather, knowing enough to fear it, but not enough to stop it, is unbearable. 17 deaths. My fault. Somehow. Everyone I pass on campus could be one of the 17. Any decision I make could be the one that triggers it. Or maybe my attempts to avoid the outcome, exactly what bring it about. The classic paradox of prophecy. Interference breeds inevitability. Last night, tucked within the binding, I found another page, loose, written in a completely different hand. It was a letter dated 1888. My dearest Beatrice, if these words reach you, then my experiment has succeeded beyond anything I imagined. The equations were accurate. Time is not a river, but a pond, every moment existing at once, waiting to be read like lines of text. But I have learned too late that some pages must remain untouched. Each prophecy demands a debt paid in blood. I realized too late to save myself. Perhaps you may succeed where I failed. The answers lie within the redactions. They are not censored, but exist in quantum ambiguity until observed. The future only solidifies once read. What remains unread can still change. Forgive me. The burden of this knowledge is a curse I never wish to pass on, with regret beyond measure. Professor James Holbrook, Department of Theoretical Physics, Cambridge University. I looked him up. Holbrook was real. He died under suspicious circumstances in 1888, discovered in his lab surrounded by scorched papers and complex formulas. Official cause: misadventure. The diary sits on my desk now as I write this, warped with meaning like a gravitational mass, bending everything around it. I keep it covered with cloth because I can't stand to look at it. But late at night, I swear I hear faint whispering, pages turning on their own, as if unseen hands are reading ahead. February 12th approaches. 3 months until the supposed catastrophe I'm destined to cause. Or perhaps already I am causing simply by knowing about it. The paradox gnaws at me. I've thought about running, disappearing, abandoning all of this, but the diary has an entry for that as well. Professor Thorne's attempt to flee to Vancouver will end at the airport. When a chance encounter with redacted compels her to return, sometimes I question my sanity. Maybe none of this is real. Maybe I never left my office, and this is all an elaborate dream woven from exhaustion. But then another prediction proves true, and the sense of inevitability tightens around me like a noose. Yesterday, I returned to Special Collections, hoping to find any remaining fragments of Holbrook's work. The card catalogue listed a donation of his personal papers from the 1890s, but when I asked, the librarian said they were destroyed in the 1973 fire, the same year the diary arrived. I'm writing all this as a warning, although I'm not sure who it's meant for. If you ever find a strange diary tucked away in your library, leave it untouched. Some knowledge isn't meant to be held. Some futures shouldn't be read. The diary is calling to me again. I feel it tugging at the edges of my mind, like a splinter buried too deep to pull free. There are still pages I haven't opened, still futures unwritten until I choose to read them. Each time I lift the cover, I promise myself it will be the last time, that maybe I'll discover something that prevents the tragedy. But deep down, I know better. The diary won the moment I saw my name inside it. Everything since then has been nothing more than another line in its story, another prophecy fulfilling itself. Tomorrow I'll try to burn it, not because I expect to succeed, but because the diary says I won't. And in this strange reality I'm trapped in, even failure feels like confirmation, even destruction feels like participation. Isn't that what true horror is? Not monsters or spirits, but the dreadful certainty that every choice was set long before we made it, that every road we walk was drawn before we took a single step. Free will, just another comforting myth, somewhere in a library much like this one. Our lives are already drafted, already read, already concluded. I can hear footsteps approaching through the stacks. The diary predicted this, to dot its time. Story 3. I first became aware of the low hum about 3 weeks ago, a steady, almost internal vibration that felt like it was coming from somewhere deep within the walls of my bedroom. At the beginning, I brushed it off as the heating system cycling, or maybe a neighbour's appliance pushing sound through the thin boundaries of my quiet suburban house. But then items in my home started shifting ever so slightly. A coffee mug rotated exactly 45 degrees from where I'd put it down. My shoes arranged perfectly parallel by the front door, even though I was certain I'd kicked them off without a thought the night before Mrs. Henderson moved into the house next door half a year back. She introduced herself as a widow, though she never elaborated on what had happened to her husband. I remember her greeting me the first day. A smile that looked practiced stretched across a face where the emotion didn't quite reach her overly wide, pale blue eyes. Those eyes had tracked me while I unloaded groceries from my car. I could feel her stare drilling into me. Just wanted to say, "Hello," she'd said with a sugary tone that made my skin tense. Always good to know your neighbors. That line kept circling in my mind as I sat in my dim living room, 3 a.m., watching her silhouette shift behind her curtains. She was awake whenever I was awake. She moved whenever I moved. The synchronicity became impossible to dismiss. The first camera I discovered was tucked inside my smoke detector. I only noticed it because the battery chirped, forcing me to climb onto a chair to replace it. The lens was no bigger than a grain of sand, but once I realized what I was seeing, the tiny glint of glass was unmistakable. My hands trembled as I tore the device apart, revealing wiring far too complex for something meant to detect smoke. And that was only the beginning. Miniature microphones embedded inside light switches, a wireless transmitter disguised as a power adapter in my kitchen. Each new discovery sent a sickening twist through my stomach. How long had they been there? How long had she been watching? I started staying awake longer, listening closely to the house. The soft electronics formed a network of sounds I began recognizing. The clicking in the walls repeated in patterns. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more, like coded messages, like communication. During the day, Mrs. Henderson maintained her pleasant facade. She'd wave at me from her garden, trimming roses that never produced a single bloom. Beautiful day out, she'd call, her voice filled with that same sticky sweetness that made my teeth clench. But her pale eyes never stopped tracking me. I started keeping meticulous notes, sketches of devices I'd found. Times the humming grew stronger, changes in her daily movements that aligned perfectly with mine. I filled notebook after notebook. Then the notes began showing up. The first one was slipped under my door while I slept, which was impossible because I hardly slept at all anymore. I just lay in the dark, listening to the house inhale and exhale around me. The message was typed plainly. I see you found the smoke detector, clever boy. But did you find the one in your bathroom mirror? Me bathroom mirror. I had stood in front of it earlier that day, studying the deep circles beneath my eyes, the sharpness in my face from months of lost sleep. Had she been watching me then? Had she been watching me the entire time? The mirror shattered easily when I hit it with a hammer. Behind it, nestled in a deliberately carved recess, was a small black device with a blinking red light. The sight of it dropped me to my knees, retching into the sink filled with glimmering shards. More notes followed. Each revealed another intrusion into my life, another hidden opening, another piece of information I had missed. Check behind the baseboards in your bedroom. That painting in the hallway has the most curious eyes, doesn't it? Your coffee maker is quite active at night. He began sleeping in my car, until even that wasn't safe. One morning, a note sat tucked behind the sun visor. The car is too obvious, come back inside. I miss watching you sleep. Police were no help. They listened politely, but I saw the doubt in their eyes. The same look my co-workers gave me when I tried to explain why I could no longer come into the office. They performed a half-hearted walkthrough of Mrs. Henderson's home while she served them cookies, her smile unwavering. Poor Thomas, she said loudly enough for me to hear from my window. He's been so overwhelmed lately. I try to keep an eye on him. That's what neighbors are for after all. Her words echoed through me as I paced my kitchen that night, fingertips brushing along the walls in search of more hidden gaps. The humming grew louder. Or maybe I just tuned into it more completely. It felt synchronized with my pulse. Eventually, I began talking to the cameras. They were the only constant presences left in my life. Their mechanical gaze witnessed every moment of my unraveling. Why are you doing this? What do you want? So many times I swore I could hear her responding. Through the walls, through the television static, through the low electronic buzz drowning my thoughts. I just want to understand you, Thomas. That's what neighbors are for. Last night, I found the final note, resting neatly on my pillow, despite the new locks, despite the motion sensors I'd installed. I think it's time to stop playing. Thomas, come next door. He'll show you where the feeds go. He'll show you everything, every moment, every breath, every private thought. Come see yourself, the way I see you know. I sit here, watching the light in her window, her silhouette pacing back and forth, with unnatural precision. The humming has reached an unbearable pitch. My hands shake as I type, but my mind feels strangely steady. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going next door. After all neighbors look out for each other, I just need to understand whether she's really been watching me all this time, or whether I've been watching myself. Her front door is unlocked. It always has been. End of recording. The document above was recovered from Thomas Reed's laptop following his disappearance on October 15th. Mrs. Henderson's home was found vacant. Though surveillance devices matching his descriptions were discovered throughout Thomas's residence, no records exist of anyone named Mrs. Henderson ever living at that address. And neighbors claim the house has been empty for years. The investigation remains open. Story 4. Dr. Marie Buckley gazed at the faded, curling wallpaper in her new office and wondered if she had made a disastrous choice. The Oak Ridge Community Health Center looked nothing like the bright, well-maintained building advertised in the job listing photos. Then again, no one expected government clinics to be luxurious. At least the paycheck would give her and Jordan a chance to rebuild their lives after losing David. Jordan. She checked her phone again. Still no calls from Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who had volunteered to watch him to preschool. Landing both the position and a babysitter so quickly felt like a miracle, especially in such a remote suburb like Oak Ridge. The autumn daylight was vanishing, stretching stark shadows over her desk. To more patients, and then home, she reminded herself. A sharp knock startled her. "Come in," she said, adjusting her lab coat. The woman who entered moved with an eerie, drifting grace, tall, slender, with long black hair streaked in silver that fell all the way to her waist. Her sorry, unusual attire for this mostly white neighborhood was the color of old, dried blood. Dr. Buckley. The woman's accented voice carried a calmness that felt unnatural. "I am Mrs. Sharma from an historical society. I hope I'm not intruding, but when I learned a new doctor had moved here with her young son." Her sentence faded, though her dark eyes did not stop studying Marie with unsettling intensity. "I'm actually about to see a patient," Marie replied firmly. "You'll need to leave." Mrs. Sharma's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. "Take your boy and leave tonight if you can. This place is dangerous for children, for boys especially." A chill worked its way up Marie's spine. "I'm sorry, but I just signed a year-long lease," she said, "and I really do need to see my next patient. At least keep him inside after nightfall," the woman said softly. "And whatever you do, don't let him near the old cemetery on Willow Street." She pulled a small bundle of dried herbs tied with red string from her bag. "Hang this above his bed." Before Marie could object, the woman glided out of the room, leaving behind the herbal charm and a lingering trace of jasmine. Marie exhaled, trying to push aside the weird encounter. She had met plenty of strange locals during her residency, yet something in that warning clung to her thoughts as she wrapped up her shift and drove home through the deepening dusk. The next few weeks passed quietly. Jordan adapted to his new preschool, though he developed the odd habit of staring out his bedroom window at night, whispering to someone unseen. Marie chalked it up to the move and the trauma of losing his father. Children had their own ways of processing grief. Then the nightmares began. They always started the same way. She would hear Jordan laughing somewhere far away. When she tried to reach him, the ground beneath her feet softened into soil that reeked of rot. The laughter twisted into screaming. A figure in white floated toward her, feet turned backward, long black hair hiding its face. Whenever it looked her way, she glimpsed glowing red eyes before waking up, breathless and shaking. She might have dismissed the dreams as stress until Halloween night. Marie had just finished her shift when her phone rang. Mrs. Patterson's trembling voice filled her ear. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Buckley. I just looked away to check my pot roast, only for a moment, and when I came back, Jordan was gone. I've searched everywhere." Marie felt the world tilt. "Call the police. I'm on my way." Everything after that blurred into flashing lights and questions she couldn't answer. No forced entry. No signs of a struggle. Only Jordan's small Halloween costume. He wanted to dress as a doctor like his mom. Lying abandoned on the neighbor's front lawn. As the police continued searching, Mrs. Sharma's warning struck Marie with terrible clarity. The cemetery on Willow Street. Without explaining, she sprinted to her car and sped off. The cemetery gates were locked, but she climbed over, ripping her coat on the rusted bars. Her flashlight illuminated crooked headstones, shadows stretching like skeletal hands reaching for her. Jordan. Her voice echoed unnaturally. Baby, where are you? A giggle answered, not Jordan's, drifting from behind a massive oak whose roots had burst through several graves. Marie ran toward it, heart hammering. What she found would scar her forever. A woman hovered several feet above the ground, her white sari glowing faintly, her backward turned feet never touching the earth. Her face, however, was pure darkness, a void where features should have been. Her hair writhed like living strands of shadow. Jordan stood beneath her, reaching upward, his eyes vacant. No. Marie lunged, but invisible force pinned her in place. Assure. She knew the legends, spirits born from women who died in childbirth or mothers who lost their children. The creature turned its hollow gaze toward her. He belongs to me now, it whispered, voice rustling like dead leaves. All the boys do. They took my child, so I take theirs. Your son. Training took over, allowing Marie to think through the terror. In the stories, she said, forcing her voice steady, shares are created from grief, from mothers who died with their children or lost them too young. Is that what happened to you? The ghost paused. Marie pressed on desperately. I understand your pain. Jordan's father died 6 months ago. A drunk driver took him from us. Sometimes I still reach for him at night, expecting to hear his key in the door. Her voice trembled. Grief twists you. It makes you want to punish the world the way it punished you. They buried us together, the Shah murmured. Her voice shifted, almost human. The missionary doctor said it was fever, but his medicines killed us both. So I take their sons, generation after generation. But it doesn't bring him back. Marie stepped forward slowly. Nothing brings them back. Hurting others won't heal you. The Shah's hair stilled. For a moment, Marie glimpsed a young face, beautiful and devastated beyond words. Please, Marie whispered, don't take him from me too. Something changed in the air. Jordan blinked, stumbling backward as if waking from a trance. Marie rushed to him, pulling him close as he sobbed. When she looked up, the Shah remained, but altered. Her sari had faded to grey. Her body seemed transparent. Cradled in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in cloth. Your grief honors them, the Shah said softly. Remember that. Then she dissolved into mist, leaving only the fragrance of jasmine. Behind Marie held Jordan tightly all the way home. In the car, she called the police and lied about finding him sleepwalking in a park. They seemed to accept it. Strange things always happened on Halloween. After all. Later that night, after Jordan was safely asleep and the herbal charm hung above his bed, Marie knew she needed to thank Mrs. Sharma and get answers. She sat in the dark of Jordan's room, watching him breathe, thinking about how grief could poison love until it became monstrous. How the dead stayed with you not as ghosts, but as memories that could either torment or heal. Just before dawn, she felt a presence, gentle this time. Through the window, she saw a faint, transparent figure holding a baby, keeping watch. No longer a Shah, but a mother choosing love instead of vengeance. Marie smiled softly. Good night, she whispered. But as she turned to leave, something froze her in place. The herbal bundle above Jordan's bed had changed. The red thread formed new shapes, letters, written like a child's clumsy handwriting. Thank you for helping her let go in mommy now. The other one might leave too. Marie's hand flew to her mouth. The other one. From somewhere deep in the darkness of the house came the sound of backward moving footsteps, and a child's giggle. Not Jordan's. They say Oak Ridge sits where the veil between worlds is thinnest, and spirits searching for what they lost rarely travel alone. and not all of them are ready to let go. Story 5. You know that strange moment when you're not completely sure whether you're awake or drifting in a dream. That hazy border where reality blurs at the edges. Now stretch that out to 72 hours. That's where I am right now. I think time stopped behaving normally somewhere around hour 6. People on the streets called the stuff eternity. Some lab-grown consciousness expanding drug that claimed to keep your mind wide open for 3 days straight. Vincent said it was cutting-edge neurochemical innovation. Something his cousin's roommate's dealer swore by. Whatever. I was drunk enough at the party to go along with it. The first hours were incredible. Colors tasted like candy. Music turned into swirling ribbons of light drifting through the air. Words had textures. Classic psychedelic effects, but pushed to an absurd extreme. I remember thinking, I've got this. Funny how that's always the last sane thought before everything tilts sideways. Hour 12. That's when the shadows started breathing. At first it was barely noticeable, the darkness in the corners of my apartment rising and falling, like a slow inhale and exhale. I told myself it was just a drug. Harm reduction guides always say the same thing. Acknowledge the hallucination. Don't interact with it. Good advice. Except the shadows slowly began to grow teeth. I'm jumping ahead. Let me back up. Around hour 10, I first realized something was wrong with my reflection. I was in the bathroom splashing water on my face, trying to steady myself after the walls started weeping. Pretty standard trip nonsense. Nothing too intense. Then I saw it. My reflection lagging. A full 3 seconds behind me. I would raise my hand, and the mirrored version of me would mimic it moments later, like a glitchy webcam. Then it began doing things I didn't do. Small things at first. A slight tilt of the head, a twitch of a finger, a grin stretching far wider than human muscles allow. I covered every mirror after that. Bed sheets, towels, anything I could grab. But reflective surfaces are everywhere. Phone screen, dark window glass, the blank TV, the metal coffee machine, even a spoon. Hour 18. The shadows clearly had teeth now, and they whispered, not in any language I recognized, yet I understood every word. They told me about layers of existence we never notice, about creatures living in the gaps between realities, about how they're always watching, always hungry. I tried calling Vincent around hour 20. The phone rang. He picked up, and then his voice came from directly behind me in my apartment. I hung up. The phone kept ringing. I removed the battery. It kept ringing anyway. Hour 24. Time stopped being reliable. My phone read 3:47 a.m. Yet outside the sun rose and set every few minutes. The microwave clock counted backward in Roman numerals. My wristwatch sprouted tiny legs and scuttled under the couch, ticking like a bomb. Worst of all, the longer it continued, the more it all made sense. What if time isn't a straight line? What if it's a Mobius loop folding over itself, and we're too limited to perceive it? The shadows kept pointing to where the ceiling met the walls, places where reality was starting to peel like old wallpaper. Hour 30. I think I found a notebook. The early entries were neat. Then the handwriting collapsed into spirals, patterns, symbols I don't remember learning. Some pages looked blank, but when I touched them, I could hear faint screaming. My reflection, the version of me that wasn't me, had found a way out. I knew because I started discovering objects moved to impossible places. Coffee cups balanced in corners. Furniture arranged into geometric shapes that hurt to look at. Sticky notes written in my own handwriting. Don't look up. They come in threes. Your bones are not the right length. Hour 40. I learned that if I held my breath long enough, I could see through the walls. The apartment next door wasn't an apartment at all. It was a vast cavern of crystal structures, pulsing with a color I can't describe. A color human eyes weren't designed to comprehend. My neighbor's cat noticed me watching. It opened its mouth and released a cloud of static butterflies. I stopped holding my breath after that. The shadows with teeth multiplied. They whispered about me, debating whether I was ready. One used my mother's voice. Another sounded like my third grade teacher. They were preparing something. Hour 50. Reality became optional. Gravity shifted sideways on Tuesdays, which now occurred every 3 hours. I found myself walking along the ceiling, and the terrifying part was not knowing how or when I got there. Water droplets rose from the sink, forming Sanskrit prophecies. I tried to eat, but everything in the fridge had developed consciousness. Leftover pizza tried negotiating world peace. The milk carton cried and begged me not to open it. It claimed it had finally achieved spiritual enlightenment in the dark. I settled for a granola bar. Each bite tasted like a different childhood memory. Hour 60. The shadows made their move. They peeled themselves from the walls and formed a circle around me. A kind of tribunal. That's when they explained the truth. This wasn't a drug trip. The peel had simply stripped away the mental filters that protect us from the true form of reality. Everything I saw was real, had always been real. Humans just pretend otherwise, because the mind can't endure the truth. I didn't believe them until they unrolled my timeline like a film strip. Every moment of my life appeared at once, branching into fractal possibilities. In one timeline, I never took the pill and left the party early. That version of me sat peacefully at home, watching TV right now, blissfully unaware. The shadows asked if I'd like to swap places with him. I refused. Hour 70. The revelations intensified. Each speck of dust held an entire universe. The silence between heartbeats stretched into infinity. My memories weren't abstract. They were physical objects I could hold. I spent what felt like years studying one childhood moment, feeding ducks with my dad on a crisp autumn day. I could smell the pond, feel the wind, taste the sandwich. The shadows approved. They began teaching me how to fold space like paper, how to slip sideways through time, how to interpret the philosophies of dust bunnies beneath the couch. Then our 72 approached, and panic hit me. I didn't want it to stop. I had learned too much. The eldest shadows gathered around. They told me the effects would fade, yes, but the knowledge would stay. Reality would never fully return to normal. They were right. It's been weeks. The drug wore off right on schedule. I went back to work. My life is normal again. Almost. But sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I see my reflection move before I do. Sometimes I hear the shadows whisper things they never finished teaching me. Sometimes, when I hold my breath, I can still see beyond the walls. And late at night, lying in the dark, I feel reality loosen at the edges again, curling back like peeling wallpaper. And behind it, some things aren't meant to be seen. The shadows warned me of that, too. Story 6. I should have realized something was off the moment I noticed I was the only person in the entire theater. But horror films are my obsession. I dissect them, study them, analyze every frame from my film class. So when the marquee flashed an announcement about a rare midnight screening of a supposedly lost 1973 horror film, I didn't hesitate. The lobby of the Century 16 was eerily empty except for one worker at the concession stand, an old man with sunken eyes and skin so pale it looked powdered. He said nothing when he handed me the ticket, didn't even blink, just stared with a strange, stiff half-smile. His name tag, nearly worn smooth, simply read PROJECTI. Theatre 7 sat at the end of an unnaturally long corridor, lined with dark, silent screening rooms. Dim emergency exit signs drowned everything in a sick, red glow. The carpet swallowed the sound of my steps, patterned with that familiar retro motif that only old theatres still use, lines and shapes from an era long gone. When I sat down dead center, perfect view, perfect distance, the screen already showed flickering pre-show ads. I pulled out my phone to jot down my first notes. Interesting decision to retain a vintage vibe using an actual film reel instead of digital projection. That's when I noticed I had no service. Not surprising, I told myself. Old building, thick walls. The lights faded exactly on time, but there were no trailers, no production tags, Only an old countdown leader scratched and worn. Then everything went dark. When the film finally appeared, something tightened in my chest. The opening shot showed the very same theatre I was sitting in. The identical Art Deco sconces. The same deep red curtains hugging the screen. But the footage had that unmistakable oversaturated 1970s film grain. The camera glided over empty seats before stopping on one lone figure in the center row. My row, a man wearing modern clothing. Taking notes on his phone. I bolted upright, knocking my actual phone onto the floor. On screen, the figure jolted at the exact same moment. When I bent down to grab my phone, he mirrored the motion perfectly. My hands grew cold as the realization hit me. That's when I heard a whisper from behind. Excellent casting. I whipped around. The room was still empty, but on screen, the other me turned as well, revealing rows of shadowy silhouettes sitting in the back seats. Shapes that didn't exist in my world. He's starting to notice. Another voice hissed. Closer now. Right on cue. The version of me on screen was spiraling, checking his phone repeatedly. Just like I had. No signal. He tried the exit door, but it stayed locked. I watched in dread as he faced my screen, and saw himself, watching himself, stretching into an infinite tunnel of reflections, little on the nose for a meta commentary. A third voice whispered, right next to my ear. But the audience eats it up. I opened my mouth to scream, nothing came out. On the screen, his mouth opened too, producing the same silent horror. Dark figures seeped from the edges of the frame, slithering toward my duplicate. Cold breath brushed the back of my neck. Didn't you say you wanted to study horror? The projectionist's voice came from nowhere and everywhere. Consider this an immersive curriculum. On screen, the figures encircled my other self, their limbs bending and contorting grotesquely as their elongated fingers reached for him. Invisible hands tightened on my real shoulders. The screen flickered violently, dissolving into chaotic patterns of light and darkness. Relax, the projectionist murmured, his voice sliding across the room. Your performance will be archived eternally. Every scream, every hopeless attempt to escape, every slow dawning realization that this existence is now yours. Shadowy audience members materialized around me, sitting in the 170 seats. Their faces were featureless masks except for gaping, eager smiles. True horror, the projectionist continued, is when the line between fiction and reality dissolves, when the viewer becomes the viewed, when the story devours the storyteller. The screen went black, but its polished surface reflected me surrounded by the grinning shapes closing in. Then the projector's light cut through the room, and I realized with choking dread that I no longer cast a shadow at all. Places, everyone, the projectionist called cheerfully. From the top, the countdown leader rolled again. On screen, Theatre 7 appeared empty until a lone figure entered, checked his phone, and chose the exact center seat. But now, unlike earlier, I could see the shadows waiting in the unseen corners, poised to begin the ritual once more. Despite the terror clawing at my throat, a small analytical part of me observed the genius of the structure, the commentary on spectatorship, the fragility of the barrier between observer and participant, the cyclical trap of horror. But that quiet, intellectual voice drowned beneath the rising terror. I wasn't analyzing a horror film anymore. I was one. The shadows rose, rippling like melting celluloid. Their fingers stretched into shapes that shouldn't exist. They swarmed closer as the projectionist whispered. Lights. A blast of white swallowed everything. My body dissolved, pulled apart, and rebuilt into ribbons of shadow and light. My mind fragmented into countless flickering frames, each preserving a perfect instant of fear. Somewhere else, another horror enthusiast settles into a seat, thrilled to examine a newly found classic. The lights fade, the countdown rolls, and there I am already projected, ready to repeat the performance for the 1000th time. That's the true terror of horror cinema, not the monsters we invent, but the way they gain independence, trapping us in endless narratives and blurring the edges of reality. We're all just characters in someone else's nightmare, awaiting the next screening. awaiting the next viewer. The projector keeps humming, the audience keeps watching, and between the frames, in the liminal darkness, I'm still searching for a way back while fading into nothing more than light and shadow, eternally preserved in the projectionist's cut. Fade to black, roll credits, but the credits never appear. They never do. The story goes on somewhere, right now playing in a silent theater at midnight, waiting for the next unsuspecting person to take their seat and become part of the film. Next time you sit alone in a movie theater or watch a horror film in the dark, you might not be just watching it, you might already be in it. Story 7. No one can say what follows after something reaches into the world and breaks the mechanism of death itself, the way a curious child might snap apart a clock just to see what happens when the gears stop moving. I was on shift at the morgue that Tuesday morning, doing the usual routine, checking toe tags, updating the logbook, making sure the refrigeration stayed steady. The air smelled of disinfectant, dense and familiar. Nothing about that morning felt unusual. Nothing hinted that life, as we knew it, was about to tear open. I remember thinking about grabbing lunch later from the sandwich shop down the street, the one with the pickles I liked. And then Jimmy Chen sat up. He'd been dead 6 hours. Heart attack. Toe tag confirmed it. I'd helped zip the bag myself. Sealed him up the way we always did. But now the black plastic slid from his shoulders like old skin as he blinked at me, calm and groggy, as if waking from a nap. His chest rose, fell, his eyes locked onto mine, his lips parting. I'd like to claim I reacted with courage or logic, but I dropped my clipboard and bolted. The sound of it hitting the floor cracked through the morgue like a gunshot. I sprinted to Dr. Marshall's office, stammering that Jimmy Chan was alive. By the time we returned, 3 more bodies had risen. One was a teenage girl brought in from a morning car crash. She lay there serenely, despite her chest being crushed inward. Her face was untouched, almost peaceful. Her tag said she'd been pronounced dead at 6:42 a.m. Dr. Marshall and I stood frozen, watching her breathe, watching her ribcage gradually reshape itself, as though invisible hands were molding clay. At first, we thought it was just our morgue, some bizarre, isolated phenomenon. News reports were chaotic and inconsistent, flickering in from everywhere, but confirming nothing. A man in Phoenix walking out of the hospital hours after a stroke had killed him. A woman in London sitting upright during her own viewing. Her heart had abruptly stopped. Slowly, patterns surfaced like a Polaroid sharpening into clarity. The newly dead rose first, then those from the day before, then the ones before that. People started calling it the mathematics of resurrection. You could calculate the exact moment someone would return based solely on their time of death. Simple, clean, cold. It took nearly a month before the first grave cracked open. A family in Kansas was keeping vigil at their grandmother's plot. She'd been buried 4 weeks before the flash. They recorded the whole thing. At first the soil trembled slightly, like something shifting deep beneath. Then the ground heaved, dirt spilling aside as hands broke through. They pulled her out gently, dusted her off, and took her home. That was when the digging frenzy began. It started with families excavating their own loved ones. Then churches organized crews. Eventually the government stepped in because you can't just have people tearing open cemeteries wherever they please. It had to be regulated. Excavators were brought in, schedules made, professional teams worked in rotation, unearthing the dead in perfect chronological order. I remember standing in Riverside Cemetery that spring, watching them, rain-soaked earth sticking to everything, people digging bare-handed until their palms bled, mothers for their children, husbands for their wives, the soil surrendering its dead like a confession. Then came the cremated. The first one appeared fully formed in a Toronto living room beside the urn that once held his ashes. Naked, bewildered, breathing, more began turning up at scattering sites, rose gardens, mountain peaks, ocean edges, each one whole and unscathed, as if death had never brushed them. Joy came first, of course. How could it not? I saw it in the morgue myself, families flooding in to reclaim their resurrected loved ones. Tears mixing with laughter as parents held children again. Churches overflowing with gratitude and dread. Streets erupting in celebration. It took about 3 months before the food shortages began. You don't think about it at first, overwhelmed by the miracle. But every resurrected person needs food, water, shelter. And the world simply didn't have enough for everyone who had ever lived. Riots over bread broke out. I remember standing in a supermarket line, watching 2 women fight over the last loaf. You couldn't really kill anyone anymore, but you could still hurt them. 6 months after the flash, I was present at the emergency council meeting. That was when they voted to halt the excavations, to leave the remaining dead underground, to let them wake in their coffins and remain there. It's them or us, the mayor said. No one argued. 3 days later, the screaming began. At first faint muffled moans, rising through the earth like a grotesque kind of music. Older graves were deep enough that you barely heard anything. But recent ones, too shallow, too close. Cemeteries had to be guarded. Families still tried to dig loved ones out. Parents especially unable to bear the thought of their children awake in darkness. Some did manage to escape their graves. Soil can only hold so long, and they no longer needed air, food, or rest. Just endless time to dig. Guards caught them, processed them, reburied them deeper. This time with concrete. I quit the morgue after that. I couldn't stand the proximity to death, whatever death had become. I turned to farming like everyone else. We all had to learn. We had to sustain this immortal world. But every night I lay awake thinking about those beneath the soil, wondering if they had woken, if they understood. The ocean risers were worst of all. You can't guard a coastline. They walked out of the surf at random, some so ancient they spoke forgotten languages, some clad in armor from civilizations long gone. Coastal patrols detained them, processed them, buried them in new mass graves. Humanitarian, they called it. At least the coffins had air holes now. A tiny mercy. Years passed, then decades. Humanity adapted like it always does. We built upward, farmed smarter, consumed less, but we never forgot what lay beneath our feet. The knowledge sat in our minds like a stone in a field, something you plow around, but can never remove. I look old now, or appear to. True age doesn't exist anymore, not without death. Some evenings I walk through Riverside Cemetery, past the guards and fences. The ground isn't soft now, it's paved over. But if you press your ear to the concrete at night, you can still hear them scratching, murmuring, waiting. The young, the ones born after the flash, don't dwell on it. To them, this is simply the world. They've never known finality, never known the mercy of an ending. They go about their endless lives and avoid thinking about what lies below. But I remember Jimmy Chan rising on that cold metal table, eyes wide like he was seeing everything for the first time. I remember the spring digging, the desperate hope that later turned to dust in our mouths. I remember when we drew the line deciding who deserved sunlight and who was condemned to eternal darkness. Sometimes, in my darker moments, I think about that flash of light, the spark that started everything. And I wonder whether it was neither blessing nor curse, but a test we failed when we chose to bury the resurrected alive, aware and helpless. A test we continue failing every day we leave them entombed. Because we learned there is something far worse than death, worse than any ending. It is being trapped between what once was and what can never be again, awake, immortal, and screaming into a darkness that has no mercy. Death was taken from us, but we're the ones who turned eternity into hell. Today's stories have come to an end. Thanks for watching. See you soon.